Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoekstra. We are now at a point in our society where 1 out of 4 girls and 1 out of 6 boys has been molested. When there's an epidemic in society, we demand a cure or a vaccine. So why aren't we more alarmed about this situation? Our guest today has started an organization to break the silence both in our families and in society. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is Nicole Bromley, founder and director of One Voice Enterprises, an organization committed to raising awareness about sexual abuse and pointing students towards healthy lifestyles and relationship choices. She has authored 2 books, Hush, Moving from Silence to Healing After Childhood Sexual Abuse, and its follow-up, Breathe, Finding Freedom to Thrive in Relationships After Childhood Sexual Abuse. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here because this is an important topic that's getting more awareness, partly because of something like your organization. Silence is deadly to this topic, isn't it?
It is. I think silence perpetuates the guilt and the shame that survivors feel, but it also allows abuse to continue. So that's why I think breaking the silence is the first step to healing and the first step to stopping abuse from happening.
How did you find your voice?
Well, for me, I think that I sat in silence for almost nearly a decade of my life, and when I finally broke the silence, I felt like I wasn't even sure if what was happening to me was wrong. I just knew that I wanted it to stop. I wanted someone to basically tell me that what was happening to me wasn't my fault and that I didn't deserve it and that it should be stopped. And so when I told my mom at 14 years old, that was the first time I broke the silence, and I was so fearful as to what would happen, but I'm so grateful that I did.
So sometimes sexual abuse for children starts very young, and so they don't actually know right and wrong, and they have to rely on the person that was supposed to be their protector, someone that they knew perhaps loved them, and this person was introducing them into something that didn't feel right or seem right.
Right. My stepfather was my abuser, and he was someone who I loved and trusted all of my life. And, you know, I believed the things that he would tell me, that he was teaching me, that this is what good dads do, that, you know, this is normal, growing up kind of thing. And so, you know, I did believe him all growing up, but then I started to really question because I hated it. I didn't want to go through it. And I didn't know why I had to keep it a secret. And so it was very confusing for a small child. It started for me at 5 years old.
And were there other things that he said to keep secret from your mom so that he sort of created this secret keeping between the two of you?
Definitely, because my mom and I were super close.
Right.
And so it was hard for me to understand why I couldn't talk to her about it, but he would say things to me like she would get really jealous if she knew how close we were, and if I told her I would never see her again. And so I was scared to death. And I felt like my parents had a really good marriage, and in my mind, I wanted to protect my mom. And so if I was able to endure this until I was 18, then, you know, I would preserve her marriage and our perfect family would be together, and I would be able to deal with it later on in life.
There's often a lot of image keeping in this, isn't it?
Yeah, I hear that so much with survivors I speak with. Personally, I was the poster child of our small community. You know, I was really involved in school, athletics. I was the homecoming queen, student council president. It seemed like I had the perfect life.
So what could be going wrong if you were accomplishing all this, right?
And no one would have ever suspected it. And my stepfather was well known in our community, very well respected. You know, I just think that it was a perfectly painted picture, and to come out with something so horrible would just have shattered it all, and that's what I was afraid of, and that's basically what he told me growing up too.
Do you think that children give hints? Do you remember you giving hints that you thought, why doesn't someone just pick up on this and ask me that next question?
Yeah, definitely. I think all children hint. They're afraid of telling. You know, I was afraid that I would never see my mom again. I was afraid of all of that. I was afraid of not being believed because I was a little girl and he was a popular man in our town. But I also wanted people to figure it out because I didn't know what was going on. It was confusing. And so I can remember growing up, and there was a woman who came to our school from the sheriff's department and showed a video of awareness about abuse. And I was thinking, this seems a lot like what's happening to me, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it would happen in a family like mine. And so
right, that must be other people.
Yeah, but
right.
I wanted to find out, and I wanted someone to sort of see maybe some red flags. And so I went to my teacher immediately after that show had ended, and I told her I really wanted to talk to her about something, but I was too afraid to tell her. I was going to write about it when we had our journal time in class in 5th grade. And I thought, well, it's really obvious what I want to talk to her about.
Because it was right after the program?
Yeah, we hadn't even left the library yet. That's where the program was being held. And I thought, you know, it's obvious. She will come to me if it's a big deal and if it's something that I need to be protected from. And she never did. I never wrote about it. I thought she'd ask me, and she never did. And so I went through 4 more years of abuse, probably the worst ones. But I also remember talking really negatively about my real dad. And my real dad wasn't a bad dad, but I just wanted I wanted my coaches to ask questions. You know, what's wrong with your relationship with your dad? You know, I was too afraid to say it was my stepfather, but I wanted people to ask questions.
So what do you believe now are the reasons that people don't ask that next hard question? Why do you think that your 5th grade teacher didn't come back to you and say, now, Nicole, you were wanting to talk with me after that presentation. Is there something that we can talk about?
Well, I think on one hand, possibly there wasn't enough awareness back then. You know, as much as children weren't taught about these things, I think even teachers and adults weren't. I think that the statistics, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by their 18th birthday, often is overlooked when it comes to families like mine. And so I was the teacher's pet. I was her favorite. I think that she absolutely never even thought that something like that could have happened in my family. So
people want to be in denial about this, don't they, in a way?
Yeah, I think so. Even especially in small communities or churches, I think that we think we're exempt from these kinds of things. You know, I speak all over the world, and there are so many schools who will say, well, that doesn't happen here. We don't need a speaker on that topic.
Right. So children fear that they won't be believed. And do you think that the mandatory reporter system, as we know, people who are involved with children, whether it's in the church or the school, a daycare, coaches, although they must report if they know. Do you think people don't want to know because they know they're going to just bring up a big problem?
I think so. And it's not just they have to report if they know. They're supposed to report if they suspect anything. So even red flags need to be reported, because you could be saving a child from years of abuse. But I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of fear in sort of opening up that can of worms and what will happen to me next, you know. And a lot of times it's a very selfish decision, in my opinion, by the person who will not report something because they're afraid of their reputation or how this will look to them rather than protecting a child.
Do you think they also wonder if the child's making it up?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think I hear that a lot, that, well, this girl's really dramatic, or, you know, she just wants attention. And you know what? That might be true, but why does she want attention? Why is she so dramatic? There's something going on that she needs to talk about. If it's abuse, okay, we're stopping it. But if it's not, we're still bringing it to the attention of a counselor or intervening at some point in her life to find out why she has this deep need to lie or, you know, to get this attention.
Why did you take the risk? And you actually told your mom. Why did you risk it?
Because she almost flat out asked me. We were in the car, and she was sharing with me for the first time a situation with my stepfather that she was sort of uneasy about. And she had shared with me that he had been acting in strange ways and was angry and violent with her, and she felt uneasy. And her confiding that into me sort of gave me an open door to feel like I could confide in her. And then she turned to me and asked me, has he done anything strange around you lately? And we had just returned from a family vacation that was completely full of molestation. I remember coming home and just thinking, you know, I went on this vacation thinking I was going to come back with all these great memories, and now here I am just feeling used, dirty, damaged, and confused and scared. And then my mom shared this with me just a couple days after our return and asked me that question in the car. And I basically just looked at her in a way that answered, yes, he has. And I don't know what it was. She says it was the Holy Spirit at work in her life, but she turned to me and said, has he ever touched you?
Wow.
And I said yes. She slammed on the brakes and pulled the car over the side of the road. And it was the first time in my whole life I knew it was wrong.
It gives me chills, because I think this is a mom who has to allow her whole life to be turned upside down for her daughter's story. And she wanted to hear about it right then and there. and she pulled over and said, "You are the most important thing that's going on right now. I want to talk to you about this."
Yep.
It is inspiring that that could happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sadly it doesn't happen that way very much. That's why I titled my first book Hush, is because so many students will say to me, "Nicole, that's awesome that your mom believed you and did the right thing, but my mom didn't. She told me to keep quiet about that."
Now, is there a sense that if people have been, mothers perhaps have been abused in their families of origins, that complicates their believing their own child?
I think so. I think it creates this system of, well, I made it through. I had to go through that too, and no one stood up for me. No one stopped it for me. I got through it. I'm a better person. So if it happened to you, it's the same thing.
Right. So you and your mom go into sort of safe hiding because you thought that once this is told and once he goes down to the police and is arrested, your lives would be in danger.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, we were in hiding for about a week, waiting for the trial date because he had denied all of the accusations. My mom had reported it, and we were really fearful. It seemed like he was trying to find us everywhere we hid, and it was a very scary
Did you
time.
continue to go to school?
It was summer break, and so I was planning to go back to school, planning to hire a bodyguard to go to and from, but 7 days after I had told my mom and she reported it, my stepfather ended up committing suicide.
And did he leave a note?
He did.
Yeah. And was there blame in that note?
Yeah, still not admitting to what he had done.
Yeah,
and his life would never be the same because of what I had said that he did.
And so, again, your courage to break the silence allowed you to have the beginning of some freedom and healing in your life. But it had a ripple effect that actually you tell survivors was not your fault.
It was his sin. It was his choice to sin against a child, and so it was, the consequences are on him, and I cannot carry that for the rest of my life. I did the right thing by telling, and that's what I share with other survivors, and that it's never too late to tell.
Isn't that one of the biggest concerns? It's like, well, this is happening to me, but why should I make everybody else suffer?
Yeah. Right. I think that's really common. I think especially for some reason for survivors, they're always so concerned about everyone else and never taking care of themselves. Right. And I think part of that is, with the abuse, so much of it is put on, keeping this abuser happy. And so I think that a survivor has to really work her or his way out of that web, because I know I struggle with people pleasing and perfectionism, and I'm pretty sure a lot of that stems from my abuse.
Tell us a little bit about how you found a match for the counselor that was so indispensable in your life.
Right away, I had to go to counseling, and I think I wasn't ready. I didn't know the woman. I didn't trust her, and I had to go there. So it didn't go well. I tried to pretend like I was fine, and she believed me and let me go. But I would say that one of the most important counselors in my life wasn't actually a licensed counselor. It would have been my music teacher. I went back to school, and I remembered that she came to my stepfather's funeral, and that meant so much to me, and I wanted to tell her the truth. I felt like I trusted her. I was so nervous because, I was one of her favorite students, and I didn't want her to look at me different, and, I had this character about me at school, and so I was afraid of ruining all of that, but she responded to me in the way I wanted to be responded to.
Which was what? What was so important about that?
First, she believed me. Then she told me it wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve it, and that she cared about me almost even more, to a point where she wanted to be there if I needed to talk, and she was. Like, I met with her about every other week after school. She would just spend time with me and listen, and she would let me read my journal entries or poems I had written. And it was just so affirming and so comforting, and really what I needed at that time. Then I went off to college, and I realized that I struggled in relationships. I wanted to have a family one day. I wanted to trust guys, and I really struggled in all of that. And so I needed help navigating, and I felt like it was time for me to find a counselor again. And so that's when I went to the college counseling center, and I found a graduate assistant who was there putting in hours, and I felt really connected with her. I felt like I could talk to her. I trusted her, and it felt safe. And I also knew I was ready at that point. I wasn't ready when I was 14, 15. But here, as a sophomore in college, I felt like I had an agenda. There were things I knew I needed to work on, and I was here for a purpose. and no one was making me do it.
So there could be counseling throughout your life.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't get all tied up, all done. Now we're done with this, right? I don't have to deal with this again.
Right. I think healing is a lifelong journey. There's always hills, there's always valleys. And I would never say, you know, I've been asked so many times, do you think you're healed? And I would never put an ED on the end of that word because, you know, I think that there's always going to be new things in life that come. We get married, we have kids. There's always something new that could be triggering of an event from your past or something that you struggle with that you didn't really struggle with before. So I think it's always good to be connected with some type of counseling or mentoring or discipleship throughout your life.
And don't you think that people who are verbally abused or maybe physically abused have the same sort of thing? Like things can trigger this desire for healing to get away from, you know, really the horror of knowing that the person who is supposed to protect you is somehow your worst nightmare.
Yeah.
Whether it's verbal abuse or physical abuse or sexual abuse. Do you find that people tell you that?
I do. I'm always so amazed. You know, I wrote my books specifically Hush with a sexual abuse survivor in mind, but it's so amazing how it has crossed all barriers of all kinds of pain and trauma that people have experienced. You know, the feeling like it's your fault and the shame and the guilt you carry, and the issue of forgiveness is so difficult. Yeah, it is interesting how all of those kinds of things kind of match up.
So when you talk about forgiveness, this actually seems like a really big and sometimes perhaps impossible next step. So first of all, why would a person and why do we need to forgive someone who's just acting in such a horrific way and caused so much pain?
People used to tell me that I needed to forgive early on in my healing, and it was really hard and painful for me because I thought they don't know what I've gone through, and I didn't understand what forgiveness was. And so once I finally understood forgiveness wasn't about my abuser, it was about me, it was about my heart, my future, my relationship with the Lord. I used to picture it as the scissors of forgiveness is what cuts off the pain from the past.
Say that again.
The scissors of forgiveness cut off the pain from the past. And so when I wasn't willing to forgive and I was holding on to the right to revenge or bitterness or whatever it was like I was dragging my abuser around with me with a rope everywhere I went. And he was almost affecting my relationship choices, and everything I did somehow was connected to that. And when I was willing to forgive, to sort of cut that cord from him, there was so much freedom in my life. And it's not something that I can explain to someone who's not ready. I don't ever want to push that on someone, but once they are ready, forgiveness is something that's unmatched in the healing process. It's something I believe that is a gift from the Lord that allows us to move on in our life and really find a lot of freedom that we wouldn't have found otherwise.
What did you understand about God at this point? Did you have to, in some ways, think about who's this God that allows me as a small child to endure this? How did you think about God throughout this process?
At the beginning of the process, there was a lot of anger and accusation towards God. You know, where were you? Why didn't you protect me? Those typical kinds of questions.
Sure.
As I journeyed through healing, I came to the understanding that God was with me through it all. You know, He cried when I cried. He was angry when I was angry. Sometimes I pictured Jesus just holding me in His arms and weeping over what had been done to me. But I think I got to that point because I was willing to not just run away from God and throw these accusations back at Him, but I was willing to finally stop and say, if you are this perfect, loving Father, you would want me to come to you with the hard things and not run away and not, you know, not giving you an opportunity to respond. And so that's when I started to pray, and I started to surround myself with Christian friends. And I was reading the Bible, and I saw His verses, the things that He had written, come alive in my life. And I saw how He was comforting me. And
so you had a real sense of presence of God in your life, that even though and this is an aspect that some people believe about God, that He is able to carry all the difficult things as well as the nicer things. He's not the Santa Claus kind of God.
Yeah.
You experienced that?
Yeah, I did. And I think mostly I realized His heart for hurting people. And He, you know, He says that He wants to come. He comes for the sick and not just the healthy. And He comes to heal up the brokenhearted, all of those kinds of things. And mostly I understood that he didn't cause my abuse. That was my stepfather's choice. That was his decision. And though God hated it and he wept over it, he would use it for something better. And that's where my hope and purpose came.
Which is exactly what's occurring. So you have taken something where sometimes I say the canoe has tipped over and the canoe is being tipped back upright. And going down this river, you're paddling strong, and you're also using your story. You're able to speak up. How do you allow it to come into your conversations in a way that helps people?
That's a good question. Eventually, a conversation will go in that direction. You know, my life hasn't always been easy. You know, I grew up and I was sexually abused by my stepdad for many years, and you know, I had the perfect family, but it wasn't really perfect behind curtains. And so, yeah, it's that kind of thing. But it starts with a level playing field with people and just giving them space to sort of vent.
How are you in your work with One Voice trying to affect the external sources that keep people hushed? You know, maybe the police department that's not educated, or people who want to be in denial about this. Do you see a systemic problem in society keeping this hushed?
Yeah, I do. I think there's a lot of problems with the criminal justice system when it comes to this. A lot of survivors are re-traumatized when they do report it, and then their abuser doesn't really get much justice served. And I think that's kind of typical, and that's something I struggle with a lot. I'm also doing a lot in the area of trafficking these days, and I just heard the statistic the other day that the most common John, the person who picks up these child prostitutes and uses them, is law enforcement. And so I think there's a lot of brokenness when it comes to that. So my hope is to begin to work in that area as well. But I think that we're doing a good job when it comes to, you know, child and family services right now. I really like to connect with those groups, rape crisis centers. I think ever since like the public trials that we hear about in these,
right,
you know, high profile cases that are always publicized, I think that's actually helping more survivors come forward. And it's also helping social services to realize the numbers of survivors out there and do something about it.
And what about church organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques, when they don't talk about this? Then how do people in their congregation actually are able to come forward? Do you find that churches are willing to say, look, this is happening right here?
I think some churches do an amazing job of it. They're very sensitive to the fact that there's a lot of abused people in their pews.
Okay.
But then there's many churches out there who still want to wear that mask of, you know, this stuff doesn't happen here. And I think that they're doing an injustice to their people, because statistically, there are many men and women sitting in their churches who have gone through this. And when we try to act like this kind of thing doesn't happen here, I think we're doing them an injustice and we're causing them to want to be silent.
So your stepfather made you watch pornography. What do you think, as an expert in this field, the role of pornography is around abuse, sexual abuse?
I have yet to find a survivor in 10 years of speaking out publicly to thousands and thousands of kids. I have yet to meet a survivor who I point blank asked, was your abuser addicted to pornography? They all say yes. They all say their abuser had some tie to pornography, that it played some role in either their abuse, you know, firsthand, or that the abuser had some kind of an addiction going on that probably led them to act out. When we constantly feed people this lie and it's so big. Media is just crazy with pornography, and I think it's causing a lot of objectification to happen and to make rape okay.
Sexual abuse is not just molestation. It's any kind of touching by an older person, isn't it?
And it's not just touching. It's looks, words, touches, yeah. Or it's just showing someone pornography. My stepfather could have only shown me pornography, never touched me, and I would have said, I'm a sexual abuse survivor. So many times survivors aren't able to label what happened to them, because I think there's almost a myth that they have to have been touched, and that's not true.
How does a person, and how did you, go from being a survivor to somebody who wanted to help people?
I guess it was going back to high school when I went to a church camp, and I told my story for the first time publicly. And at the time, I thought I was the only one who'd ever gone through that kind of thing, especially the only one who had families like mine. And I returned from that camp, receiving letters from other kids at the camp telling me their stories. And I realized I wasn't alone. I realized that these kids just needed someone to have enough courage to say, this happened to me, so that they could say me too. And then that's when I opened up my Bible and I read a verse that changed my life forever. It was 2 Corinthians 1, 3, and 4 that says that God comforts us in our trouble so we can comfort others in any trouble. And that spoke so loud to me at that time in my life. I saw how God had used me as a 15-year-old girl to provide courage to all these other kids to tell their stories. And I felt called at that point to be a voice for the voiceless. And I didn't know how it was going to happen, but I just prayed God would open doors for me to be that sort of person for him. And so I guess that's where it was. It wasn't about me. It was about bringing his kingdom here to earth and allowing him to set people free. And I felt like I wasn't going to just live as a survivor of sexual abuse. I wanted to be a survivor of sexual abuse who brought others alongside of me to create one big voice that's breaking the silence on this epidemic. And that's what's been happening.
Thank you. My guest today has been Nicole Bromley, founder and director of One Voice Enterprises and author of 2 books about healing after sexual abuse, Hush and Breathe. I'm Shirley Hoekstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.